Not bacteria, not viruses. So
Fungus.
In this video, we're going to analyze the traits of real fungi in order to determine if the fungal infection, cordyceps, in The Last of Us show on HBO is possible in real life. In order to uncover if The Last of Us cordyceps fungus is possible in real life, we first need to understand how it works so we can compare its traits to the traits of real fungi. So let's hop right in and discuss the specifics so we can determine if we should all get ready for the apocalypse. So let's start with the list of traits the fungus has so we can look at them one by one to determine their plausibility. So to begin the list, we have the hive mind, or the ability for the fungus to communicate over vast distances. And then comes the zombification, or the ability for the fungus to take control of someone's body. Next we have the way that the fungus initially spread through the wheat crops. Then comes the fact that there is no known cure. Next we have the ability to transmit through bites, and lastly, but most importantly, is the general ability to infect humans. I would also like to say, if you disagree with any of the science that I present in this video, or generally have any other comments that you would like to say, feel free to post them below and we can have a conversation about it there. With that out of the way, let's start with the first trait on our list, the hive mind, or the ability for the fungus to communicate over vast distances. We see this in the show outside of the museum when Joel interacts with the tendrils to ensure that they're dead. We also see this again later on in episode 2 when the tendrils come up from the ground connecting to the infected. And there actually is something like this in real life, but first we need to understand that there's kind of two parts to a fungus. You have the mushroom, or the fruit body, and this will be most similar to the infected in the show, and then you have the mycelium. Mycelium grows out in little white strands in all directions, connecting the roots of all the plants in that area. And once the mycelium has connected the plants in the area, this enables them to share information and resources through the mycelial network that was created by the fungus. It's also important to know that the mycelium and the mushroom are really the same organism. The mushroom is just essentially the fruit of the mycelium. So now that we know it's possible for mycelium to communicate with not only its own mushrooms, but other plants it has connected to, we only have one question left to answer. Can it do so over vast distances? And this leads us into the largest living organism on the planet, a 10,000-year-old mycelium in Oregon spanning over 3.5 square miles. This mycelium is completely underground, and each step you take above, there are nearly 300 miles of mycelium beneath you. Even 1 teaspoon of garden soil contains several miles of mycelium. With that being said, the way mycelium has been depicted in the show and its relationship with the infected is essentially the exact way it works in real life, so I think it's safe to say that the hive mind trait is definitely possible. The next step is to determine if a fungi really has the ability to take over the body of an organism like a zombie and force it to do its bidding. Which takes us to probably the most terrifying thing about The Last of Us cordyceps fungus, the fact that it's based on a real fungus that infects hundreds of ant species called Ophiocordyceps. Ophiocordyceps works by first taking control of the ant's body, leaving them alive and aware of what's going on. Once the fungus has control, it has one goal: to find the ideal location where the heat and humidity are just right, so when it finally chooses to kill the ant, by forcing it to bite itself so hard that it pierces its own skull, a mushroom tendril can grow from its head and inject spores onto any other ants in the area. While it should be noted there is currently no known organism outside of tropical insects and arachnids that get infected by a fungus in this way, that doesn't completely rule out this trait, considering zoonotic diseases like the swine flu have been evolving and transmitting between humans and animals for thousands of years. So is it realistic that a zombifying fungus can exist? Yes. The next trait on our list is the ability of the fungus to initially spread through the wheat crops. And in episode 2, we can see the mycologist Dr. Ratna mention that the flour and grain factory is the perfect substrate. In biology, a substrate is defined as a surface on which an organism can live. And the relationship between the fungus and the wheat is essentially the same as the relationship between a rose and the dirt that it's planted in. We also see this reaffirmed in episode 1 that the spread comes from wheat and flour crops, when we see Sarah and Joel have no pancake mix to make pancakes. Then they refuse the biscuits offered by the neighbors. And then Sarah doesn't eat cookies at the neighbors. And lastly, Joel forgets to get the cake, leading to a total of 4 times they almost get potentially exposed to the fungus without even knowing. So, can fungi actually grow within wheat in real life? The answer is an astounding yes. There are a plethora of fungi that can infect wheat crops. A good example of this is ergot. Ergot is a fungus that can grow on wheat and later infect flour milled from that infected crop. Ergot is toxic to humans and some livestock animals. Symptoms of ergot include convulsions, hallucination, miscarriage, and sometimes even death. So, as for the fungus transmitting initially through wheat, I would give The Last of Us another check for its real world possibilities. That leads us to our next question, the fact that there's no known cure. We've seen this iterated in the show a couple of times, once in the first scene of the show, and as well in the first scene of episode 2. While there are antifungal drugs that currently exist that can work to treat and prevent fungal infections like yeast infections or athlete's foot by breaking down the cell walls of the fungus and killing it, it should be said that similar to antibiotic resistant bacteria, there are fungi that are resistant to certain treatments. That being said, I wouldn't 100% agree that there is no cure to the cordyceps fungus in the show. I will admit though that it is highly likely that there is actually no known cure. Similar to the bubonic plague, the most fatal pandemic in human history that killed around a third of the entire population of Europe, they had no cure at the time, which is why so many people died. In modern day, after the discovery of the antibiotic penicillin, which funnily enough is a derivative from a fungus, most bacterial infections such as the bubonic plague have become completely non-life-threatening and trivial. Getting back to our original question at hand, I think it is actually fairly realistic that there would be no known cure if a similar fungus existed in real life. The next ingredient in our doomsday cocktail is the ability to spread through bites. We can see this in the show when Tess gets bitten by a clicker. While we never actually see her transition, we can see that her condition is obviously worsening, and it's only a matter of time. So is there real evidence of a fungus spreading in this way? Yes and no. While it is true that there are many highly contagious fungi that can get passed from human to human, including the previously mentioned athlete's foot, there's not much evidence of fungi getting transmitted through bites. Thrush, which is caused by a fungal yeast that naturally grows in the mouth and genital areas, is normally harmless, but it can overgrow, causing a need for treatment. Thrush can be transmitted through contact with infected areas such as kissing, but it tends to only grow in dark, moist areas such as armpits. Now, while it is theoretically possible to transmit thrush through biting someone, it isn't very likely that this will be a super effective way to spread a fungal infection. So with that in mind, I'm going to give this trait a plausible. Now it's finally time to answer the most important question. Does cordyceps fungi have the ability to infect humans? While we already know that there are fungi that can infect humans, they usually tend to only affect the skin in areas that are moist, dark, and cool, whereas cordyceps clearly grows throughout the body. This leads us into the show, where we hear the mycologist in the opening scene of the episode 1 mention the most important part of this whole discussion.
What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer?
The reason this is so important is because current existing fungi are really not well suited for the high body temperature of humans. Current known species of fungi really tend to thrive within environmental temperatures around 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And studies show that for every 1 degree Celsius rise in body temperature, the number of fungal species that can infect an organism goes down by 6%. Many scientists also believe that this is part of the reason mammals evolved to have such high body temperatures compared to other animals like amphibians, because there are tens of thousands of fungi that can infect cold-blooded animals, whereas there are only a few hundred fungi that can infect humans and other mammals. The scientists responsible for the aforementioned study also developed an equation to determine the optimal body temperature to maximize the high heat benefits of warding off fungi and minimize the cost of energy, mainly food, to maintain that level of heat. It turns out the answer comes out to be about 36.7 degrees Celsius or around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the average human body temperature. That being said, we can see why it is so important for the planet to warm up, because this would give the fungi the evolutionary drive to exist in higher temperature environments. The evolution needed by the fungi to obtain this heat resistance is very similar to the way COVID-19 or the flu have different variants that could be more infectious or more deadly. And fungi, bacteria, and viruses all have a small amount of genetic material, so they can evolve very quickly with just a few mutations. The problem is that these mutations are entirely random, and some mutations could make the infection worse at spreading, which lowers the chances of the specific mutation of heat resistance that we need to happen. But it is still possible that the Earth heating up could cause fungi that mutate or evolve to have a trait that makes them more resistant to high heat to thrive in this new environment. After analyzing each defining trait of the cordyceps fungus we see take over the world in the Last of Us show, you may be thinking to yourself that we're doomed. But the truth really isn't so clear. While each individual trait the infection possesses seems to be based on factual, real-life fungi, a fungus like the one in The Last of Us would need hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to evolve to contain everything it would need to take over the world like we see in the show. So, the answer to our original question, is The Last of Us fungus possible in real life? While it is rooted in truth, I would say no, because it is virtually impossible for a fungus to evolve in any reasonable measure of time to have the effect seen in the show. If you made it to this point in the video, I would like to thank you for watching, and I would also like to personally thank my girlfriend, my friends, and my therapist for pushing me and believing in me. And if you like this video, I would ask that you consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, because I plan to release at least one video per month in 2023, and all the support helps me keep going. As far as this channel goes, my two passions are gaming and science, and I plan to focus my content around those. So if you have any requests or suggestions, post them in the comments below.